She was the librarian who lived by silence, until one quiet night, she taught me that even whispers can set the heart on fire. The library was different after hours. By day, it was a space of murmured voices and restless footsteps, a place where pages turned like whispers in the wind. But at night, when the last students drifted out and the doors clicked shut, the silence thickened, not empty, but alive, as if the walls themselves were listening. I stayed behind most evenings, finishing catalog work for extra pay and a bit of peace. The warm light from the brass desk lamps pooled across the tables, turning the wood to amber. My world had become rhythm, the sound of the scanner beeping, the soft slide of a card through my fingers, the steady ticking of the clock above the front desk. Then came her voice, low, deliberate, gently amused. "You misfiled one of the returns," she said from behind me. I turned. MS. Rowan stood near the end of the aisle, a few steps away, holding a worn hardcover in one hand. She wasn't what I expected from someone in charge of the entire library, not distant or sharp, but quietly composed. Her glasses sat low on her nose, and strands of chestnut hair had slipped loose from the bun at the back of her neck. Her tone wasn't scolding, it was the kind that invited you to smile at yourself. "I did?" I asked, stepping closer. She nodded, her lips curving slightly. "Only by one shelf. Don't worry, the books forgive small mistakes." I caught the faintest scent of her perfume, something soft, like lavender and paper, and suddenly the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was thick, charged, full of something I couldn't quite name. She moved past me, brushing against my shoulder as she reached for the correct spot on the shelf. Her hand lingered a moment longer than necessary, tracing the spine of the book before sliding it into place. The simple motion, graceful, practiced, drew my focus more than I wanted to admit. When she turned back, the light caught the fine lines around her eyes. They didn't make her look older, they made her look like someone who had lived. Someone who understood quiet things, like patience and restraint. "You stay late often," she said softly, tilting her head. "Most assistants rush out the minute the clock strikes." I shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I like the quiet." She smiled again, that same knowing curve that felt half amusement, half secret. "Then you've chosen the right place." Her footsteps faded down the aisle, the soft click of her heels echoing through the empty hall. But her presence lingered, in the scent of her perfume, in the memory of her voice, in the still air that now felt somehow warmer. I turned back to my desk, but the rhythm was gone. The scanner's beep felt too loud, the ticking clock too sharp. Every sound seemed to wait for her to return, and when she finally did, walking past with a stack of books pressed to her chest, I caught myself glancing up before I even knew why. That night, the silence of the library no longer felt like solitude. It felt like something had awakened inside it, quiet, steady, and waiting. After that night, the rhythm of my evenings shifted. The library became more than just a workspace, it became a place where time seemed to slow down, where silence wasn't just quiet but comforting. And somewhere in that silence, Ms. Rowan and I began to share more than small talk. She had a way of appearing soundlessly, turning corners, setting down books, glancing my way as if she'd been watching for a while. Sometimes I'd look up from my desk and find her leaning over the counter, adjusting her glasses, a faint half-smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Still here?" she'd ask, her tone playful. "I could ask you the same," I'd reply. Her laughter came softly, barely above the hum of the air vents, but it had a weight, a warmth that stayed with me. It wasn't loud or showy, just real. Most nights, we worked in quiet companionship. I'd sort returned books while she typed reports at her desk. Occasionally, she'd read a line aloud from whatever she was cataloging, a favorite poem or an old novel, her voice shaping the words in a way that made them sound newly alive. "Listen to this," she said once, reading from a weathered copy of Jane Eyre. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me, I am a free human being with an independent will." Her voice lingered on the last words, soft but certain. I didn't reply, I just watched her, the way her lips formed each syllable, how her eyes glimmered faintly under the warm light. Later, she caught me watching and smiled, not shy, not teasing, just aware. One evening, as I reached for a book on the top shelf, the ladder beneath me wobbled. She stepped in quickly, steadying it with both hands. "Careful," she murmured, her voice calm but firm. Her fingers brushed my wrist, just a second, maybe less, but it felt longer. The warmth of her touch stayed on my skin long after she stepped back. When I climbed down, she gave me a look that wasn't quite serious but wasn't playful either. "You could have fallen," she said. "I didn't," I answered, smiling. "You were there." She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to say something more, and then just nodded, returning to her desk. That's how it always was with her. Nothing rushed. Nothing obvious. But beneath every glance, every shared silence, there was a quiet current, something alive that neither of us dared name. By then, I knew the sound of her presence before she even spoke, the soft tap of her heels, the faint rustle of her cardigan sleeve as she reached for a book, the gentle exhale she made when she smiled. And yet, it was her silences that drew me most, those moments between conversation when her eyes would drift away, thoughtful, almost wistful, as though she were reading something invisible on the air. Those evenings felt suspended, as if we existed between pages, somewhere outside of time. Each night, as we turned off the lamps and locked the doors, I found myself glancing back, at the tables, the shelves, the space where her laughter still seemed to hum. The library wasn't just a place anymore. It had become a quiet heartbeat, and somehow, I had learned to listen to it through her. Rain had been falling softly for hours, drumming a gentle rhythm against the tall library windows. The usually familiar space smelled of wet earth and old books, a mix that made the quiet feel even more intimate. That evening, she suggested I stay late, not for work, exactly, but to avoid the storm. I accepted without thinking, drawn by the simple presence of her company. We settled in the small break room with mugs of tea she'd brewed. The steam curled between us, carrying the faint scent of chamomile and the lingering lavender from her perfume. Outside, the rain pattered relentlessly, softening the world beyond the glass. Inside, everything felt contained, warm, and suspended. "I don't usually like storms," she admitted quietly, stirring her tea. Her eyes weren't on me yet, but I could see the way her fingers tightened on the cup, knuckles pale. "Why not?" I asked, leaning slightly forward, careful not to crowd her. "Unpredictable," she said with a small, almost wistful laugh. "And, they remind me of things I'd rather forget sometimes." I said nothing, just nodded, letting her words settle. She glanced up at me, her gaze fleeting but heavy with meaning. That moment, the pause, the gentle hum of the heater, the quiet clink of the spoon against her cup, held more than small talk ever could. "I didn't think I'd meet anyone who understood," quiet, she continued, her voice barely above the rain's whisper. "Someone who doesn't feel the need to fill every silence." I felt a flutter in my chest, the warmth spreading across my shoulders. "I think sometimes silence speaks more than words," I murmured. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a fraction of a second, her usual composed demeanor softened. The subtle lines around her eyes seemed less like distance and more like traces of stories she'd lived through, moments of laughter and sorrow alike. "I've been lonely," she admitted finally, almost too softly to hear. "Even surrounded by books, surrounded by people. Sometimes it feels like I exist between the pages and nobody really sees me." Her words landed gently, but they stirred something inside me, a protective, tender impulse. Without thinking, I reached out, placing my hand lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let it rest there, warm and steady, like a quiet acknowledgement that the moment was real. We stayed that way for several minutes, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. Outside, the world blurred in gray and silver. Inside, a connection had formed that neither of us could easily define, but both of us recognized. Finally, she let out a small sigh, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "You listen," she said. "Really listen. And it makes me feel safe." I smiled softly, a little awkwardly, because I couldn't find words that matched the weight of the moment. "I'm glad," I said simply. And in the quiet that followed, with the rain whispering around the library, I realized how much I had been waiting for this, not a grand confession or dramatic gesture, but the simple intimacy of being seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered more than I'd expected. The storm outside didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt protective, almost conspiratorial, as if it had cleared the world just so we could be here, two quiet souls discovering each other in the hush of falling rain. The library was quieter than usual that night. Most of the students had left, leaving the shelves and polished wooden floors bathed in the soft glow of the desk lamps. The golden light spilled across the aisles, highlighting the dust motes that danced like tiny, suspended stars. I moved slowly between the shelves, cataloging returns, but I wasn't alone. She appeared in the aisle ahead, moving with that effortless grace that seemed to slow time itself. Her glasses caught the light for a fraction of a second before she tucked them back onto her nose. "Still here?" she asked, her voice low and teasing. I chuckled nervously. "It's peaceful." She tilted her head, studying me with a look that made my stomach tighten. The smile on her face wasn't just playful, it was knowing. "Peaceful," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "Quiet boys are always the wildest at night." The words hung in the air like a challenge, teasing and electric. I laughed, though it sounded more startled than confident, because I had no idea how to respond. Her eyes glimmered behind the lenses, and for a moment, she simply watched me, letting the silence stretch between us. Then she stepped closer, so close I could see the subtle silver threads in her hair, the way the warm lamplight kissed the curve of her cheek. The faint scent of her perfume, lavender and something deeper I couldn't name, drifted to me. I felt a shift in the air, almost tangible, a current that wasn't there before. "Careful," she murmured, reaching past me to straighten a row of books on the top shelf. Her fingers brushed mine ever so slightly. It was nothing overt, but it sent a shiver through me. I swallowed, feeling the weight of her gaze like a quiet invitation. I wanted to speak, to say something clever or meaningful, but the words caught in my throat. All I could do was meet her eyes, letting her see the flutter of surprise and curiosity there. Her laugh, soft and teasing, broke the tension, but it was different this time, warmer, deeper, carrying an unspoken acknowledgement of something stirring between us. She didn't step back immediately. Instead, she lingered, her hand resting on the books as if it were too late to move. I realized then that this was a new kind of silence. Not the comfortable, companionable quiet of shared work. This was charged, alive. A pause that carried meaning, waiting for one of us to break it. The library seemed to shrink around us, the rest of the world melting away. Every sound, the hum of the heater, the soft click of her heels, the distant patter of rain on the roof, became amplified. Every detail of her presence pressed into me, the curve of her neck as she tilted her head, the way her eyes held mine just long enough to make my pulse quicken. Finally, she straightened, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "You'd better get back to work," she said, though her tone was gentle, teasing, almost reluctant. I nodded, trying to steady myself, aware that something had shifted. Something unspoken had crossed the invisible line between us, delicate and thrilling, leaving me acutely aware of every glance, every brush of fingertips, every breath shared in the quiet night. And as I turned back to the shelves, cataloging books with shaky hands, I knew that nothing in the library, or my heart, would ever feel quite the same again. The next morning, the library felt different, though nothing had changed. The shelves were the same, the polished wood glowed under soft fluorescent light, and the smell of old paper and dust hung in the air as usual. But the warmth I had grown used to was absent. Ms. Rowan moved among the aisles with her usual elegance, cataloging and straightening, yet there was a restraint in her posture, a subtle stiffness that wasn't there before. She smiled politely when we crossed paths, but it didn't reach her eyes. The sparkle, the teasing warmth, the quiet intimacy of our late-night moments, all of it seemed deliberately kept at bay. I tried to focus on my work, but every glance toward her was like a jolt. The way she reached for a book, careful not to brush against me, the way her laughter now remained just faintly behind her lips, it all screamed absence louder than words ever could. I couldn't help but replay the night before. Her teasing words, the brush of her fingers, the lingering glance, all of it had stirred something I wasn't ready to name. Had I misread her intentions? Had my own eagerness pushed the line too far? The questions gnawed at me quietly, making every movement between the shelves feel heavier than usual. Even the library's silence felt sharp. The usual hum of the air vent seemed louder, almost accusing. The distant tick of the clock no longer comforted me, it reminded me of the space that had grown between us overnight. At lunch, I lingered by my desk longer than necessary, hoping for a sign, a spark, any indication that things hadn't truly changed. But when she passed by, her eyes barely flicked toward me, and she nodded curtly before moving on. My chest tightened. I tried to tell myself it wasn't personal, perhaps she had a busy morning, perhaps she was preoccupied with work. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The subtle connection we had shared was now a fragile thread, stretched thin by unspoken tension. I felt the weight of restraint pressing down on both of us, and it made me ache in ways I didn't expect. I wondered if she, too, felt the pull, the quiet, almost forbidden current between us. Her composed demeanor hinted at a storm beneath, a hesitation born of self-restraint, experience, and the invisible barriers we had yet to cross. I longed to reach out, to bridge the distance, but fear held me back. Fear of misreading her signals, of overstepping, of shattering the fragile bond we had built. That evening, as the last of the students left and the library doors clicked shut, I lingered near the entrance, hoping for a moment alone with her. But she stayed at her desk, absorbed in paperwork, distant and untouchable. I left with a quiet sigh, the echo of her absence trailing me down the empty hall. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, a ghost of presence that reminded me just how much the library, and she, had come to mean. The distance between us wasn't just physical. It was a quiet, pulsing tension, a challenge, a question, and a warning all at once. And as I walked home through the drizzle, I realized that navigating it would require patience, courage, and the willingness to confront both her boundaries and my own longing. For the first time, I understood that the slowest journeys often leave the deepest impressions. The rain had stopped, leaving the city streets wet and glimmering in the soft glow of streetlights. I had stayed late again, cataloging books and straightening the aisles, when I heard her voice, soft, deliberate, and carrying just enough weight to make me pause. "You didn't do anything wrong." I looked up to see her standing near the doorway of the main reading room. Her expression was cautious but open, as if she had been holding back something for days. The sight of her there, the familiar tilt of her head, the way her hair caught the warm lamplight, made my chest tighten. I didn't mean to make things complicated," I said, stepping closer, unsure how to bridge the quiet distance that had stretched between us over the past week. She shook her head gently. "No. You've been nothing but kind." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the calm composure she always wore. She paused, searching for words, and in that silence, I saw her vulnerability laid bare. I didn't speak, just watched, letting her find the courage to continue. The library, usually a fortress of quiet and order, seemed suspended in the moment, the air thick with anticipation, the soft hum of the heater like a heartbeat. "I've been fighting how easy it feels to be near you," she finally admitted, her eyes meeting mine fully. There was no teasing now, no playful glint, just honesty, raw and sincere. "I shouldn't feel this drawn to someone, not like this. But I do." Her words settled over me like sunlight after a storm. I could feel the pull in my own chest, the same quiet longing I had tried to keep contained. Without thinking, I reached out and lightly brushed her fingers with mine. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest in mine, warm and steady, a fragile bridge over the distance that had grown between us. We stood there, hands touching, letting the moment stretch. Outside, the world was washed in reflection, puddles glimmering, streetlights bending in the rainwater, and inside, the library seemed to hold its breath. "I care about you," I said finally, my voice low, almost a whisper. "More than I thought I could." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, a mixture of relief, acknowledgement, and quiet amusement. "I know," she replied softly. "I can feel it. And I feel it too." For a heartbeat, we simply stood together, letting our hands linger, feeling the warmth and steadiness that neither of us had dared to name aloud before. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, it was quiet, intimate, and profoundly real. The tension that had shadowed the past week melted, replaced by a steady, comforting closeness. A simple touch, a shared gaze, a soft smile, and in that quiet reconciliation, we both realized that the bond between us had shifted, deepened, and found its footing. When she finally released my hand, it was with a lightness, a trust, a promise. "Thank you for staying," she said. I smiled, feeling the weight of unspoken emotions ease. "Always," I replied. And in the lingering quiet of the library, we both understood, sometimes, the most powerful moments aren't shouted or declared. They are felt, in a brush of fingers, a steady gaze, and the courage to let someone in. Weeks had passed since that quiet, honest evening. The library settled into its familiar rhythm again, but now it carried a subtle difference, a warmth that wasn't just from the brass lamps or the polished wood, but from the presence of something mutual, something acknowledged. Ms. Rowan moved through the aisles as gracefully as ever, but there was an ease to her posture, a softness in her eyes when she looked at me that hadn't been there before. Our late-night work sessions continued, but now they were quieter, more deliberate, like a shared secret neither of us had to name. I lingered longer at the end of the evening, cataloging books and straightening shelves, but I no longer felt the ache of uncertainty. When our hands brushed, fleeting, almost accidental, it was warm, reassuring, an echo of the connection we had finally allowed ourselves to embrace. One evening, as I gathered my things near the front desk, she walked over with her usual calm confidence, holding a stack of returned books. Her smile carried a lightness, a playful warmth, and something deeper, the comfort of someone who had found her own courage. "Thank you for staying late again," she said softly, setting the books down beside my desk. "I like the quiet," I replied, feeling the words carry more meaning than usual. Her eyes met mine, glimmering behind the lenses of her glasses. "So do I," she said, a hint of laughter in her voice. And in that small exchange, the tension of the past weeks dissolved entirely. It wasn't a grand confession, nor a dramatic declaration, it was simple, human, and profoundly satisfying. We spent the last hour together shelving books, sharing small conversations, and exchanging quiet smiles. Occasionally, our hands would brush, and each time, there was no rush to pull away, just a gentle acknowledgement of connection, of trust, of something quietly precious that had grown between us. The lamps cast pools of warm light across the aisles, illuminating the dust motes floating like tiny stars. The world outside, with its bustling streets and distant traffic, seemed irrelevant. Here, in this sanctuary of paper and knowledge, our companionship had found its home. As I finally closed the doors for the night, she lingered beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her presence. I offered a small, awkward smile. She returned it, calm and steady, as if to say, "We are here, together, and it is enough." In the silence of the empty library, with the faint scent of lavender and old books around us, I realized that love, quiet, patient, and unhurried, didn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it thrived in glances, in shared silences, in the courage to simply be present for someone else. We turned toward the exit together, our steps in quiet sync, and for a moment, our fingers brushed lightly, a fleeting touch, yet full of meaning. No words were necessary. The understanding between us was complete. And as we stepped out into the cool night, the city lights reflecting in the wet pavement, I felt a deep, steady warmth in my chest. This was more than companionship, more than attraction. It was the quiet certainty that two people, patient and attentive, had found each other in the stillness. The library had given us time, space, and silence. But we had given each other something far greater, the courage to let connection flourish, gently, beautifully, and fully. If you enjoyed this slow-burn story of quiet glances, lingering touches, and a love that unfolds in its own time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another tale of romance and connection. Share your favorite moment in the comments. We'd love to hear which part of the library night stayed with you the most.